The old man's hand trembled as he reached for his cup in the upscale coffee shop. His beige sweater had seen better days, and his weathered hat sat slightly askew on his silver hair. Arthur Whitman was nearly invisible among the crowd of well-dressed patrons with their designer clothes and expensive watches. When his arthritic fingers slipped, sending coffee splashing onto the sleeve of his sweater, he quickly rolled it up to prevent staining. That's when the angry red scar running down his forearm became visible. "Seriously, can you believe this?" A young man in a black hoodie at the next table spoke loudly into his phone, making no attempt to hide his disgust. "Some old geezer just spilled his drink everywhere. This place used to have standards." Jason's expensive earbuds gleamed as he smirked, deliberately raising his voice. "Should have stayed in the retirement home if he can't hold a cup straight." Arthur's eyes, still sharp despite his age, caught the young man's contemptuous glance. He quietly dabbed at the spill with a napkin, his dignity intact despite the public humiliation. "Yeah, I know, right?" Jason continued into his phone, leaning back in his chair to put his feet up. "Got this nasty scar too. Probably can't even afford proper medical care. What's he even doing here?" The cafe manager approached Arthur, not to help, but with obvious annoyance. "Sir, perhaps you might be more comfortable somewhere else. Our clientele expects a certain atmosphere." Arthur nodded silently, reaching for his worn wallet. The same hands that had once pulled dozens of wounded soldiers to safety now fumbled with a few crumpled bills, leaving them on the table as he slowly rose to his feet. As he passed Jason's table, the young man covered his phone's microphone and sneered. "Hey, Grandpa, the senior center serves free coffee down the street." What Jason couldn't know was that tomorrow, the name Arthur Whitman would mean something very different to him, something that would change his life forever. Behind Arthur, Whitman's stooped shoulders and weathered hands, lay a lifetime of extraordinary service that few people ever discovered. Those who knew him in his prime spoke his name with reverence, though these admirers were scattered across the country, many of them owing their very lives to his actions. William Arthur Whitman had earned the highest military honors for bravery under fire during a rescue mission that became legendary among certain military circles. When his unit was ambushed and severely outgunned, Arthur had crawled through a minefield to drag 17 wounded men to safety, including the unit's commanding officer. The scar on his arm, the one that had drawn such disdain from the young man at the cafe, was just one mark from that harrowing day. But Arthur's greatest achievement came after the war, when nightmares plagued his sleep and the faces of fallen comrades haunted his days. Instead of surrendering to the darkness that consumed many veterans, he channeled his pain into purpose. "Some wounds don't bleed," he once told a reporter who discovered his work almost by accident. "Those are the ones that take the longest to heal." The Whitman Foundation for Combat Recovery began in Arthur's garage, with just 3 veterans meeting weekly. Using his military pension and working odd jobs to fund it, he created a sanctuary where broken warriors could rebuild their sense of self. What made his approach unique was its simplicity. He listened without judgment, created community through shared work, and believed in each person's capacity to heal when every medical professional had given up. One of his first participants was a young lieutenant who had attempted suicide 3 times after returning home. "Arthur saved me without ever mentioning my attempts," the man, now a counselor himself, had said at a private foundation gathering. "He just handed me a hammer and pointed at a wall that needed fixing. 2 hours later, I realized I hadn't thought about dying once." That's how he works, giving purpose back one nail at a time. The foundation now operated in 7 states, with a network of volunteer counselors, many of them former participants. Arthur had personally mentored over 200 veterans through their darkest hours, sitting with them through nightmares, answering middle-of-the-night phone calls, and showing up at hospitals when the shadows grew too dark. Despite the foundation's growth and the thousands of lives transformed, Arthur refused all publicity. He declined interviews, redirected donation recognition to others, and continued to live in the same modest apartment he'd rented for 30 years. His name appeared nowhere on the foundation's materials. His insistence that healing came from community, not from any single person. Few people knew that the gentle old man who fed pigeons in the park every morning had once addressed Congress, about veteran suicide rates, or that his innovative recovery program was being studied at major universities as a breakthrough approach for trauma recovery. The quiet ones, he often told new foundation volunteers, are usually carrying the heaviest load. Our job isn't to lighten their burden, but to help them find the strength they've always had. In the week following the cafe incident, Arthur continued his routine as he had for decades. Each morning, he walked to the corner store, purchased a newspaper, and spent an hour at the same park bench reading and occasionally tossing crumbs to the gathering birds. The local children called him the Birdman and sometimes sat with him as he told them gentle stories. Never about war, always about courage. What Arthur didn't know was that the young man from the cafe, Jason Richards, frequented the same neighborhood. Jason lived in a luxury apartment paid for by his father, Colonel Michael Richards, who commanded an elite special operations unit. The colonel had insisted his son live on his own to build character. Though the generous allowance and expensive location somewhat undermined this goal, 3 days after their encounter, Jason spotted Arthur sitting on his usual bench. "Look who it is," he muttered to his girlfriend as they walked past. The coffee spiller, his girlfriend Sophia, frowned at his tone. "He's just an old man, Jason. What's your problem?" "My problem? Did you see his clothes? This is a premium neighborhood. People pay good money to live here without having to look at..." He gestured dismissively toward Arthur. "You're being a jerk," Sophia said, slowing her pace. "He's not bothering anyone." Jason rolled his eyes. "My dad works with veterans all the time. The real heroes are respected, taken care of. This guy's probably just some nobody who couldn't make anything of himself." As they passed, Arthur glanced up from his newspaper and nodded politely at the young couple. For a moment, their eyes met, and something in the old man's calm gaze made Jason look away first. Later that afternoon, Arthur visited the Foundation's newest location, a renovated warehouse where veterans learned woodworking as therapy. As he guided a young woman with trembling hands through the process of sanding a table edge, a staff member approached. "Mr. Whitman, the colonel's office called again. He's insisting on that meeting." Arthur sighed. "Tell him I'm still not interested in publicity. The Foundation works because it's about the veterans, not about me." He says it's not about publicity. This time, something about his son needing guidance. Arthur's hands stilled on the wood. "His son?" "Yes, sir. Apparently the boy's been..." These are the colonel's words. "Disappointing." Arthur thought of the countless young men he'd guided. Over the years, many of them seemingly lost causes who just needed someone to believe in them. "Tell the colonel I'll think about it." That evening, as Arthur prepared his simple dinner, his phone rang. A rare occurrence, as few people had his number. "Arthur, it's Michael Richards, please don't hang up." Arthur settled into his worn armchair. "Colonel, I've told you before, it's not about the Foundation this time," the colonel interrupted. "It's about my son, Jason. He's lost his way, Arthur. No respect, no purpose. Thinks the world owes him something." Arthur thought of the young man at the cafe, wondering if there could be a connection. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" "You've helped so many," Colonel Richards said, his voice dropping, "including me all those years ago. I wouldn't ask if I weren't desperate." Arthur's mind flashed back to the battlefield, to the young lieutenant he'd dragged to safety, now Colonel Richards. The universe had a strange way of connecting dots. "I'll consider it," Arthur said finally, "but no promises." Ooh. As he hung up, Arthur had no idea that the next day would bring a confrontation that would force his hidden life into the light. The upscale cafe was buzzing with the lunch crowd when Arthur entered the following day. He'd decided that avoiding places because of one unpleasant encounter wasn't the example he wanted to set for the veterans he mentored. Quiet courage meant facing small discomforts with dignity. He chose a table in the corner, ordered a simple black coffee, and opened his newspaper. Within minutes, he heard a familiar voice at the entrance. "Yeah, Dad, I'm already here." Jason spoke into his phone as he scanned the cafe for an empty table. "Some military buddy of yours?" "Fine, whatever, I'll wait, but this better not take long." Arthur watched over the edge of his newspaper as Jason took a seat near the window. tapping impatiently on his phone screen. The universe did indeed work in mysterious ways. A few minutes later, Jason glanced up and noticed Arthur. A flash of recognition crossed his face, followed by a smirk. He stood and approached Arthur's table. "Well, if it isn't the coffee spiller," Jason said, looming over the seated man. "Brave of you to come back." Arthur folded his newspaper calmly. "Good afternoon. Young man, waiting for someone." "My dad, actually, some important military guy he wants me to meet." Jason rolled his eyes. "Another one of his character-building lectures coming, I guess." Arthur nodded thoughtfully. "Fathers often see potential in us that we haven't recognized yet." "Whatever, old man. My dad thinks everyone should worship the ground soldiers walk on. Maybe that's why he can't stand me." For a brief moment, vulnerability cracked through Jason's arrogant facade. "Perhaps he just wants you to understand what real sacrifice looks like," Arthur suggested. Jason's phone buzzed with a text. "He's pulling up now. Look, do me a favor, and don't mention last time, okay?" He's already disappointed enough. As Jason walked away, Arthur noticed several cafe patrons watching the exchange with curious eyes. The manager, who had asked him to leave previously, approached with an apologetic smile. "Your coffee's on the house today, sir. That young man has been rude to several customers." Arthur thanked him with a nod as the cafe door opened. Colonel Michael Richards entered, his military posture unmistakable even in civilian clothes. His eyes scanned the room, finding his son first, then continuing until they locked on Arthur. The colonel froze, his expression transforming from stern to something approaching reverence. Without acknowledging Jason, he walked directly to Arthur's table and snapped to attention. "Major Whitman," he said, his voice carrying through the now quiet cafe. "It's been too long, sir." Arthur sighed, rising slowly to his feet. "Michael, I thought we agreed to meet elsewhere. I apologize, sir, but when Jason mentioned this cafe, The colonel turned to his confused son. "Jason, do you have any idea who you've been speaking to?" Jason glanced between his father and Arthur, bewilderment replacing his usual smugness. "Dad, what are you talking about? He's just some old guy who—" "This old guy," Colonel Richards interrupted, "is Major William Arthur Whitman, the man who pulled me and 16 others from certain death when our unit was ambushed, the man who received the highest honor our country bestows for valor." The cafe had gone completely silent now, all eyes on their table. "But more than that," the colonel continued, "he's the founder of the Whitman Foundation, which has saved thousands of veterans from suicide and despair, including me." The colonel turned to the cafe at large. "Many of you have loved ones who served. 1 in 5 returned with invisible wounds. If they found healing, there's a good chance this man had something to do with it." Jason's face had drained of color as he stared at Arthur, seeing him truly for the first time. "The scar," he whispered. "That's from pulling your father out of a burning transport," Arthur confirmed quietly. "Though I'd appreciate if we could continue this conversation somewhere more private." Too late. A woman at a nearby table stood, tears in her eyes. "Major Whitman, my brother went through your program 3 years ago. He wouldn't be alive today without you." Then another patron rose. "Sir, my son volunteers at your Seattle Center. He says you changed everything about how we understand combat trauma." The recognition Arthur had avoided for decades cascaded through the cafe as person after person stood to acknowledge connections to his work. Through it all, Arthur remained, standing straight but uncomfortable, while Jason seemed to shrink with each new revelation. "Now would be a good time to subscribe to this channel," Arthur whispered to the stunned young man with a small smile, "because life is about to teach you something important." Colonel Richards insisted on driving both Arthur and his son to the Foundation's main building, a renovated fire station that now served as a community center for veterans. Jason sat in silent shock in the back seat, the world he thought he understood crumbling around him. As they entered the building, veterans of all ages greeted Arthur with respect that bordered on reverence, yet was tempered with genuine affection. They called him Major or simply Arthur, never Sir or Mr. Whitman shone at his insistence. "This is what respect looks like," Colonel Richards told his son quietly. "Not demanded but earned, not through intimidation but through service." In Arthur's modest office, little more than a desk and some filing cabinets, photographs covered one wall. Young men and women in uniform, families reunited, group pictures of smiling veterans with their arms around each other's shoulders. Small handwritten notes accompanied many of the photos. "Thank you for giving me my life back. 1 year sober today because you believed." "My kids have their father again." Jason sank into a chair, his customary arrogance nowhere to be seen. "I don't understand. If you've done all this, then why do you live like you do? Why do you let people like me treat you that way?" Arthur settled behind his desk, the afternoon light softening the lines of his weathered face. "Because this work isn't about me, it never has been." He gestured toward the wall of photographs. "Each person here fought their own battle after coming home. I just provided a safe place for that battle." He leaned forward. "The moment this becomes about Arthur Whitman is the moment it stops working." Colonel Richards stepped forward. "Arthur saved my life twice, once on the battlefield, and again when I came home and couldn't find my way back to myself." Jason looked at his father with new eyes. "You never told me." "Some wounds are hard to speak about," the colonel replied. "That's something I learned from Arthur." A young veteran appeared at the door with a message for Arthur, then paused when he saw Jason. "Hey, aren't you the guy from the cafe, the one who was hassling the major?" Jason's face flushed with shame, but Arthur interceded smoothly. "This Fair's Colonel Richards' son. He's considering volunteering with us." The surprise on Jason's face was matched only by his father's. Arthur simply smiled, the wisdom of decades in his eyes. "Young man," he addressed Jason directly, "we're starting a new woodworking program for first responders with PTSD. We need someone to coordinate the schedules and materials. No experience necessary, just respect and a willingness to listen more." "Then you speak." "But after how I treated you," Jason began, Arthur cut him off gently. "In my experience, those who need to learn respect most desperately are often the ones who benefit most from giving it." He glanced at the colonel. "Your father found his healing by helping others find theirs. Perhaps you'll discover something similar." The colonel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's your choice, Jason." For the first time in years, Jason looked at his father without resentment or defiance. Then he turned to Arthur, seeing not a shabby old man, but the quiet strength that had saved thousands. "I'd like to try," he said simply. Arthur nodded, satisfied. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. He smiled slightly. "And Jason? No earbuds." The human mind builds walls of judgment so quickly, creating barriers between hearts before we've even exchanged words. We look at the surface, the weathered hands, the worn clothes, the stooped shoulders, and we assign value based on these fleeting impressions. But beneath these shallow markers lie the true measures of a person. Courage shown when no one is watching, kindness offered without expectation of return, and wisdom earned through both triumph and heartbreak. Arthur's story isn't unusual in one important way. Every day we walk past heroes disguised as ordinary people. The woman who quietly pays for a stranger's groceries might be raising 3 foster children. The old man feeding pigeons might have saved dozens of lives. The quiet colleague might be battling illness with unimaginable courage. In the months that followed, Jason became a different young man. Working alongside veterans who had lost limbs yet never lost hope, he discovered that true strength isn't found in intimidation or status. He learned to listen to stories of trauma and resilience with growing humility. And most importantly, he learned to look beyond the surface of every person he met. One afternoon, a year later, a young veteran became agitated during a session, throwing tools and shouting. While others stepped back, Jason approached calmly. "Let's take a walk," he said quietly, the way Arthur would have. And as they walked, he listened without judgment, as the man's pain poured out. Arthur, watching from his office window, smiled. The cycle continued, one heart touching another, healing rippling outward. We cannot know the battles others have fought, the burdens they carry, or the courage that keeps them standing. But we can choose to approach each person with the humility of not knowing their full story. We can withhold quick judgment, offer respect freely, and remember that the measure of a person is rarely visible on the surface. The next time you see someone who seems insignificant, remember Arthur in his worn sweater and hat. Remember that greatness often walks quietly among us, seeking no recognition, changing the world one unseen act of kindness at a time. True worth isn't found in appearances or possessions, but in the impact we have on others' lives. The hands we've held in darkness, the hope we've restored when all seemed lost, and the hearts we've touched with simple human dignity.